skull is really nice though. Cool skull.
Yes, pretty cool. Go on. Orbital opening, okay. Now the blue one is the frontal bone. This is the supraorbital notch. You can see it in the lateral 2/3 and the medial 1/3 of the frontal bone of the supraorbital margin. में you see the supraorbital notch. You can see it right here. यहाँ कभी नॉच होता है, कभी फोरामेन होता है. तो मेरे में नॉच है भाई, इसमें एक साइड नॉच है, इसमें एक साइड फोरामेन है. देख लो, ठीक है. Okay. Now then you can see the posterior and anterior ethmoidal foramina. Posterior anterior ethmoidal foramina in the frontal bone. But they're called ethmoidal foramina because they're next to the ethmoidal bone. So you see here, right here, posterior and anterior ethmoidal foramina. Dikh raha hai? Okay. Then next comes the orbital plate of the ethmoidal bone. This is the gray part is the orbital plate of the ethmoidal bone. यहाँ पे, if you see, you can see यहाँ पे, और यहाँ पे you can see the suture and this is the orbital plate of the ethmoidal bone. इस साइड देख ले अगर दिख नहीं रहा तो. Suture, orbital plate of the ethmoidal bone इधर है, suture के बाद. ठीक है. एंड ऑर्बिटल प्लेट ऑफ द एथमॉइडल बोन के जस्ट बगल में देयर इज द पर्पल कलर लैक्रिमल बोन. ठीक है. सो देयर इज द ऑर्बिटल प्लेट ऑफ द एथमॉइडल बोन, लैक्रिमल बोन, एंड यहाँ पे साइड में देयर इज अ फोसा फॉर लैक्रिमल सैक. सो यू कैन सी हियर अगेन, दिस इज द सूचर, दिस इज द ऑर्बिटल प्लेट फॉर द एथमॉइडल बोन, दिस इज द लैक्रिमल बोन, इतना यहाँ से लैक्रिमल बोन, एंड यहाँ पे देयर इज अ लैक्रिमल सैक, राइट, फोसा फॉर लैक्रिमल सैक. ठीक है. Now, नीचे this is the orbital surface. One second. The green part is the orbital surface for maxilla.
Orbital process.
Orbital surface of maxilla. ठीक है. This is the orbital surface of maxilla. तो देखो भाई ये maxilla है ये पूरा. तो this is the orbital surface of maxilla.
Cool.
And this is the orbital plate for ethmoidal bone. And this is the orbital surface of maxilla. Done? Okay. Orbital surface of maxilla. And यहाँ पे कभी-कभी infraorbital groove हो जाता है. जो इधर है यहाँ पे infraorbital groove you'll see. Infraorbital groove. Done. So this was the orbital plate, orbital surface of maxilla, and this is the infraorbital groove. Then उसके बाद now this is the orbital surface of the zygomatic bone, the orange one. Orbital surface of the zygomatic bone. Blue part is the orbital surface of frontal bone.
Okay.
ठीक है. So this is the orbital surface of the zygomatic bone. यहाँ पे तुमको सूचर भी दिखेगा. Orbital surface of the zygomatic bone. This is the orbital surface of the frontal bone.
Okay.
So this was the orbital surface of the zygomatic bone, orbital surface of the frontal bone, orbital surface of the maxilla bone, orbital plate of the ethmoidal bone.
Okay.
ठीक है.
And then उसके साइड में लैक्रिमल.
हाँ, उसके साइड में लैक्रिमल बोन आता है. Now you see the yellow part. This is a sphenoid का पूरा part है. ठीक है. Now this curved part is the orbital surface of lesser wing of sphenoid.
Okay.
And this big part is the orbital surface of greater wing of sphenoid. तो यहाँ पे तुमको बहुत क्लियरली दिखेगा ये जो है ये वाला पार्ट. यू कैन सी दिस इज द ऑर्बिटल सरफेस ऑफ लेसर विंग ऑफ स्फेनॉइड, दिस इज द ऑर्बिटल सरफेस ऑफ ग्रेटर विंग ऑफ स्फेनॉइड. इसके बगल में ऑर्बिटल सरफेस ऑफ जाइगोमैटिक बोन आता है. ठीक है. यू कैन सी द सूचर ऑल्सो. ऑर्बिटल सरफेस ऑफ ग्रेटर विंग ऑफ स्फेनॉइड, ऑर्बिटल सरफेस ऑफ लेसर विंग ऑफ स्फेनॉइड. अब इसके बीच में यहाँ पे देखो दिस विल बी द ऑप्टिक कैनाल. गोल गोल ऑप्टिक कैनाल होता है. फिर यहाँ पे आता है तुम्हारा सुपीरियर ऑर्बिटल फिशर एंड inferior orbital fissure. तो यहाँ पे भी देख लो this one right here is the optic canal. This is the superior orbital fissure right here. Superior orbital fissure, and this is the inferior orbital fissure. Optic canal, superior orbital fissure, inferior orbital fissure. Done.
Orbital opening is basically a quadrangular opening that you can see here. मतलब 4 parts, मतलब 1, 2, 3, 4 quadrangular opening. The supraorbital margin, this one is entirely formed by the frontal bone. And at the junction of the lateral 2/3 and medial 1/3 you have the you have the supraorbital notch, which transmits the supraorbital nerves and vessels. So medial 1/3 and lateral 2/3 supraorbital notch which transmits the supraorbital nerves and vessels. Nerve and vessels. Then you have the infraorbital margin is formed by the zygomatic bone laterally. You see this is the zygomatic bone, ये सूचर है. zygomatic bone laterally and the maxilla medially. तो ये हो गया frontal bone का और ये हो गया zygomatic और maxilla का inferior surface. Then the medial is very ill defined. It is formed by the frontal bone above, इतना सा frontal bone. फिर उसके बाद the lacrimal crest of the frontal process of maxilla. This is the frontal process of maxilla and here is the lacrimal sac के लिए जगह. So this is the lacrimal crest of the frontal process of maxilla. And then below, so ऊपर से it is frontal bone and नीचे से lacrimal crest of the frontal process of maxilla. Then if you see the lateral orbital margin is formed by the frontal process of the zygomatic bone and zygomatic process of the frontal bone, and this is the zygomatic suture between the two bones.
And यहाँ पे you can see the infraorbital foramen and the zygomaticofacial foramen.
So infraorbital foramen, infraorbital nerve and vessels, and zygomaticofacial foramen, zygomaticofacial nerve, which is the branch of the
Maxillary nerve.
Alright. Now this anterior bony aperture nose piriform shaped. This piriform aperture is pear shaped by above by the lower border of the nasal bone and below by the nasal notch of the maxilla on each sides. Articulations anteriorly with the opposite bone at the internasal suture. If you see there's the internasal suture, the anterior internasal suture. Posteriorly with the frontal process of the maxilla.
इधर side
So
में.
this is the frontal process of maxilla. Then superiorly with the frontal bone at the frontonasal suture. Inferiorly with the upper nasal cartilage supposed to be here is attached to it. So anteriorly you will see the opposite nasal bone.
Anteriorly you'll see the internasal suture. Posteriorly you'll see the frontonasal suture.
With the frontal process of maxilla.
Yeah, with the frontal process of maxilla.
Superiorly the frontal bone with the frontonasal suture.
Yeah, तो okay,
maxillary suture.
nasomaxillary
So
suture.
this is the nasomaxillary suture. Nasomaxillary suture. And inferiorly it is the cartilage. The upper nasal cartilage is attached to it.
And lower border of the nasal bones and upper nasal cartilage के बीच में transmits the external nasal nerve.
External nasal nerve lies between the nasal bone and the upper nasal cartilage, so external nasal nerve. Now the anterior nasal spine you see here is a sharp projection in the medial plane, lower border of this, and renion, like the nasion was the here, so renion is the lowermost part of the internasal suture. Alright, now the nasal bone is the most commonly fractured bone of the face, पूरे face में. उसके बाद आता है mandible और parietal eminence that we studied, the next bone to be fractured. Now lower part of the face, the maxilla contains a large sharp, basically the maxilla basically plays a very important role in the facial skeleton. The anterior surface of the body of the maxilla, it has the nasal notch medially. Nasal notch किधर है? This is the nasal notch. This is the anterior nasal spine. Infraorbital foramen. 1 centimeters below the infraorbital margin. This is the infraorbital margin, either infraorbital foramen. The incisive foramen, which is above the incisive teeth, and the canine fossa, which is lateral to the canine.
Here and here.
Somewhere here. In addition, there are 3 out of the 4 processes of the maxilla are seen in this. Frontal process of the maxilla, zygomatic process of the maxilla, the alveolar process of the maxilla, and then there is which bears the sockets for upper teeth, and there's this the palatine process of
which you see in basalis.
I guess that's it. Buccinator, yeah. Which just about the sutures is normal. Internasal suture है ये, frontonasal suture, nasomaxillary suture, lacrimomaxillary suture, frontomaxillary suture is here.
ऊपर हाँ.
Frontomaxillary suture, intermaxillary suture, zygomaticomaxillary suture, zygomaticofrontal suture. मतलब 2 bones के बीच में.
Those sutures तुमको ये frontalis में दिखते हैं.
और buccinator, it arises from the buccinator का origin insertion is simple. The upper fibers arise from the maxilla opposite the molar teeth. The lower fibers arise from the mandible
opposite molar teeth.
The middle fibers pterygomandibular raphe. The upper fibers they go straight to the upper lip, lower fibers lower lip, and the middle fibers decussate. And buccinator helps in the whistling action.
Okay, done.